It was an ordinary afternoon in the city, the kind of day when people rush around with their coffees, their phones, and their thoughts tangled in 100 directions. The air smelled of roasted beans from a small coffee shop tucked at the corner of a busy street. Inside, the place was filled with the low hum of chatter, the sound of cups clinking, and the grinding of coffee beans. Among the crowd was a young woman waiting in line, scrolling through her phone and trying to calm her tired nerves after a long morning. When her turn finally came, she placed her order, collected her cup, and stepped aside to add sugar. She was in no mood for delays, but just then, a man brushed past her shoulder, reaching out to grab his drink from the counter. Hot liquid almost spilled on her hand. She pulled back quickly, her heart jumping from the sudden move. "Excuse me," she said sharply. Turning toward him, the man barely glanced her way, mumbling a short, careless word that sounded more like a sigh than an apology. His expression carried no hint of regret. It felt like he thought the whole world should simply adjust around him. Her patience snapped. "You could at least say a proper sorry," she fired, her voice clear enough for a few heads to turn. The man straightened a little, finally meeting her eyes. He looked calm, almost too calm, as though her anger didn't touch him at all. His clothes were neat, his watch expensive, and his posture confident. He seemed like the type who had never been questioned, someone used to being treated with quiet respect. "I did say sorry," he replied in a cool tone, not raising his voice but not softening either. "Not really," she shot back, folding her arms. "You barged in without looking, and then muttered like it was beneath you to apologize properly. That's not how normal people act." Her words hung in the air. A couple sitting by the window exchanged glances, amused at the drama unfolding with their cappuccinos. The barista kept her head down, pretending not to hear. The man arched his brow slightly, studying her as if she were some puzzle he wasn't sure whether to solve or ignore. He didn't lash out. He didn't defend himself with anger. He just let a faint, almost amused smile tug at the corner of his lips. That smile irritated her even more. "You know what?" she continued, unable to stop herself. "It doesn't cost anything to respect people. But maybe you're the kind of person who thinks money is enough and manners are optional." That was it. She had said it. A sharp sting of insult, clear enough for everyone around to hear. And then silence. For a second, the room felt heavier, the air thicker. The man stood there, expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on her. But instead of answering back, he simply picked up his coffee cup, gave her one last look that was neither angry nor kind, and walked away toward the door. His silence was louder than any words. It left her standing there with her chest rising and falling quickly. Fueled by both adrenaline and pride, she grabbed her cup and sank into an empty chair, pretending to scroll through her phone again. But her thoughts were restless. She didn't know why she had reacted so strongly. Maybe it was his dismissive attitude. Maybe it was the way he looked at her as if she was wasting his time. She had always hated arrogance, and to her, he seemed like the perfect example of it. Little did she know, the man she had just scolded wasn't just some careless stranger at a coffee shop. He was someone who lived in a world far different from hers. Someone whose name carried weight in business circles. Someone people normally tried to impress instead of insult. But at that moment, she knew none of this. To her, he was just another entitled man who needed to be put in his place. As she sipped her drink, she replayed the scene in her head. Part of her felt proud for standing up, for not letting someone walk over her. Another part of her wondered if she had overreacted in public. Still, she shook her head and decided she was right. Respect mattered. It didn't matter how much money or power someone had. Meanwhile, outside, the man walked down the street with his usual calm stride. On the surface, he looked untouched by the encounter. But inside, he was turning the moment over and over again. He had been insulted many times in life, business rivals, critics, even media stories, but never in such a straightforward, personal way by someone who didn't even know who he was. Most people, once they recognized his face or his name, softened their tone, sometimes even apologized for being blunt. This woman had done the opposite. She had looked him straight in the eye and spoken her mind without fear. And for some strange reason, instead of anger, he felt a flicker of interest. Back inside, she finished her coffee, unaware that her words had left a deeper mark than she imagined. To her, it was just another heated moment in a busy day. To him, it was the beginning of something unexpected. The next morning, life carried on as usual for her. She had put the coffee shop incident at the back of her mind. After all, it wasn't unusual for her to speak up when someone acted rudely. That had always been her nature. She wasn't the type to stay quiet, no matter who stood in front of her. To her, it was just another ordinary day, and just another stranger she would probably never see again. But sometimes life has its own way of arranging surprises. Later that week, her close friend called with an invitation. "There's a big charity event tomorrow evening," her friend said with excitement. "It's at the city hall. You should come. I promise it will be fun. Lots of people, music, good food. You'll enjoy it." At first, she wasn't sure. Fancy events weren't her scene. She liked simple places, where she didn't feel judged for what she wore or how she spoke. But her friend was persuasive, and finally she agreed. "Fine, but don't expect me to stay long," she laughed. The next evening, she slipped into a modest dress, not too flashy, just enough to look presentable. As she entered the hall, her eyes widened at the sight. The place was decorated beautifully, chandeliers shining above, waiters carrying trays of sparkling drinks, and guests in elegant outfits chatting as though they belonged to another world. She followed her friend through the crowd, smiling politely, feeling slightly out of place but trying to hide it. And then it happened. At the far end of the hall, near the stage where the host was speaking, she saw a familiar face. Her heart skipped. There he was, the very same man from the coffee shop, the one she had scolded without hesitation. Only this time, he looked different. He was no longer the stranger grabbing a coffee in casual clothes. He was dressed in a sharp suit, confident yet composed, surrounded by people who seemed eager for his attention. Her eyes widened as the host introduced him. "Let's welcome our main guest tonight, a man whose generosity has changed countless lives, a leader in business, and a supporter of many causes." Applause filled the hall. He walked up, shook hands with the host, and gave a short, graceful speech about giving back to the community. His tone was steady, his words thoughtful. The crowd admired him. She stood frozen, her cheeks heating up with embarrassment. Only then did she realize the truth. The man she had insulted so boldly was not just any man. He was a millionaire, respected, admired, and clearly far more important than she had imagined. Her friend whispered, "That's him. I've read about him before. He's one of the most successful businessmen in the country. Can you believe it?" But she could hardly hear. Her mind raced back to her words in the coffee shop. "Manners are optional for people like you." She remembered the look in his eyes, the way he hadn't argued back. A mix of regret and pride battled inside her. She had no idea who he was, and yet she had stood her ground. After the speech, the evening continued with music and chatter. She did her best to blend in, hoping he wouldn't notice her. But fate, once again, had other plans. As she walked toward the refreshment table, trying to keep her head low, she felt a sudden pause in the room. She looked up and saw him walking straight toward her. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to turn away, but her feet wouldn't move. He stopped a few steps from her, his expression calm, his eyes steady on hers. For a moment, it felt like the entire hall had gone quiet, though the music still played in the background. "You," he said finally, with a hint of amusement in his tone. "We meet again." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to reply, "Looks like we do." There was no apology in her voice, though her heart was pounding. She wasn't the kind of person to back down easily, no matter how wealthy or powerful someone was. But she could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. "You didn't recognize me that day, did you?" he asked. She shook her head honestly. "No, I didn't, and it wouldn't have mattered if I had. Respect is respect. Everyone deserves it, rich or not." For the first time, he smiled, not the faint, teasing smile from the coffee shop, but a genuine one. It caught her off guard. "I see," he said quietly, almost as though her words had confirmed something for him. Then, without another word, he stepped aside to let her pass. She exhaled slowly, not realizing she had been holding her breath. What had just happened? Why did his calmness unsettle her more than his silence at the cafe? Later that night, As she prepared to leave, she caught sight of him again, speaking warmly to an elderly woman who stood beside him. The woman's eyes were kind, her smile gentle. That to looked close, perhaps his mother, she guessed. And though she didn't know it yet, that very woman had already noticed her. What she didn't realize was that the woman had been watching from the beginning. She had seen the spark in the coffee shop confrontation, had heard stories of her son being treated with empty flattery everywhere he went, and had noticed how rare it was for someone to challenge him without hesitation. To the mother, that wasn't disrespect, it was strength. And in that crowded, glittering hall, a thought bloomed quietly in the mother's heart. That young woman, she has something different, something real. The night ended, but the story had just begun. The night of the charity event stayed in her mind longer than she wanted. She had left the hall quietly, telling herself it was nothing. He was just a man she had clashed with, a stranger who happened to be far wealthier and more respected than she ever imagined. She convinced herself that their paths had crossed by accident twice, and that was the end of it. But life rarely listens to such decisions. A few days later, she was at her workplace, typing away on her computer when her manager walked over. "There's a conference tomorrow," the manager said. "Big one. We've been invited to represent. I need you there. It'll be a good networking opportunity." She hesitated. After the charity event, she wasn't eager to face another gathering filled with wealthy people who spoke in polished tones and carried themselves like royalty. Still, work was work. She nodded in agreement. The next day, she found herself stepping into a large hotel ballroom. The place buzzed with conversations, presentations flashing on giant screens, and people exchanging business cards like they were currency. She straightened her shoulders, determined to focus on her task. And then, as if the universe had a mischievous sense of humor, she saw him again. He was at the front, speaking to a group of executives. His voice carried across the room, confident, calm, and authoritative. Everyone listened intently. She felt a strange mix of irritation and curiosity. Why did he keep appearing in places she least expected? She tried to avoid him, walking toward the far side of the room. But no matter how hard she tried, her eyes kept drifting back. His presence filled the space effortlessly, not just because of his status, but because of something quieter and ease that made people lean in when he spoke. During a coffee break, she stood near a table, pouring herself a cup, when she heard a voice behind her. "Careful," he said lightly. "Don't spill it this time." Her hand froze. She turned slowly, and there he was, standing just close enough to make her heart jump. His eyes held a spark of humor, and she realized he remembered the cafe incident far too well. She narrowed her eyes. "Funny, you're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Just a little," he admitted. "You don't often meet people who speak to me the way you did." She set her cup down, folding her arms. "Maybe that's the problem. People should treat you like anyone else." He tilted his head, studying her with that calm gaze again. "And you don't care who I am?" Her reply was immediate. "Why should I? Titles and money don't impress me." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then he gave a soft laugh. "You're honest." "Brutally so." She blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment or a criticism. But before she could answer, someone called his name, pulling him back into a circle of conversations. He left her standing there, unsettled once again. Later that afternoon, as the event continued, she found herself in a smaller discussion group. To her surprise, he joined the same table, sitting directly across from her. It was almost as if fate wanted to test her patience. She tried to keep her attention on the speaker, but she could feel his gaze resting on her occasionally. Not in a mocking way, not arrogant either, but curious, like he was trying to figure her out. When the session ended, the group began dispersing. She gathered her notes quickly, ready to leave, when his voice stopped her. "You know," he said, walking beside her, "most people I meet want something from me. Connections, favors, opportunities. You don't. That makes you unusual." She glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "Or maybe I just don't like you," she said with a half smile, trying to mask her nervousness with humor. He chuckled. "Maybe, but I don't think that's true." Her chest tightened. She hated how his words made her feel seen, as though he could read through her defenses. As they stepped outside the ballroom, the cool air brushed against her face. She turned to leave, but before she could, she noticed an older woman approaching him, the same gentle-faced woman from the charity event. His mother. She greeted him warmly, then turned her kind eyes toward her. "So this is the young woman I've heard about," she said softly. Her smile warmed. Her heart raced. "Me?" she asked, surprised. His mother nodded. "Yes, you have a strong spirit. I admire that." The words caught her off guard. Compliments usually slid off her easily, but something in the woman's tone felt genuine, almost motherly. She managed a polite smile, though her thoughts were a storm inside. As she walked away that day, she couldn't shake the feeling. The man unsettled her, yes, but his mother's words lingered like a quiet echo. She didn't know it yet, but those words were the beginning of something she could never have predicted. And for the man, the more he crossed paths with her, the more intrigued he became. Not because she was impressed by his wealth or his influence, she wasn't, but because she wasn't afraid of him at all. She treated him like a man, not a millionaire, and that, to him, was more powerful than any applause he had ever received. The conference ended, but the memory of that moment lingered long after. For her, it was just another strange day, another unexpected crossing of paths with the same man she couldn't seem to escape. But for his mother, the woman who had quietly observed the exchange, it was something more. She had raised her son in a world where people bowed too easily. From the time he was young, others had looked at him not just as a boy, but as a future heir, a person to impress, a ticket to security. Wherever he went, compliments followed him like shadows. But his mother knew those compliments often carried no truth. They were rehearsed lines, spoken not from hearts, but from hopes of gaining favor. So when she saw her son standing opposite a young woman who wasn't impressed, who wasn't intimidated, who didn't soften her tone even after learning who he was, it caught her attention. She noticed how her son didn't argue back, how he listened quietly, even when her words were sharp. That silence told her more about him than any speech ever had. The mother thought to herself, "This one is different." The next week, she decided to learn more. At a small family gathering, as her son sat sipping tea, she leaned closer. "That young woman," she said casually, though her eyes were sharp. "You've met her more than once now, haven't you?" Her son looked up, slightly surprised. "You noticed?" "Of course," she replied, smiling faintly. "I notice everything when it comes to you." He hesitated, then admitted, "She's not like others." The mother's smile deepened. "Not afraid of you?" He gave a quiet laugh. "Not even a little. She insulted me in a cafe without knowing who I was. And when she found out later, she didn't take back a word. That's strength," his mother said firmly. "Do you know how rare that is?" He didn't answer right away, but his eyes softened, and that told her everything she needed to know. Days later, fate played its hand again. The mother attended a cultural exhibition hosted by a local community group. To her delight, she spotted the young woman there too, walking alongside a friend, admiring the art displays. She didn't approach right away. Instead, she watched quietly from a distance, observing the way the girl moved, how she smiled at a child tugging at his mother's hand, how she bent down to help an elderly man pick up something he had dropped. There was no pretension, no performance, just small acts of kindness done naturally, as though they cost her nothing. The mother felt her heart warm. Later, she made her way closer and struck up a casual conversation. "You have an eye for beauty," she said gently, noticing the girl lingering over a painting. The young woman smiled politely. "It's coming. Simple things like this remind me of peace." The mother nodded, letting the conversation flow naturally. They spoke about art, about life, even about little annoyances of the world. The girl's answers were straightforward, sometimes blunt, but never cruel. There was honesty in her words, and it was refreshing. Before they parted, the mother said softly, "You remind me of someone strong I once knew." The girl tilted her head. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" The mother chuckled. "A very good thing." That night, as she returned home, the mother couldn't hide her thoughts. She imagined what it would be like to have this young woman in the family. Not because of her beauty, not because of any social advantage, but because of her spirit. She could see her son's restlessness calm around her, his pride tested but in a way that helped him grow. She thought of all the women she had seen before, elegant, polite, but always rehearsed. They had wanted her son, but for his name, his wealth, his power. This one, though she didn't even want him. And somehow, that made her perfect. Over the next few days, she began dropping small hints to her son. Over breakfast, she would say, "Do you realize how she spoke to you? Not out of disrespect, but out of belief that everyone is equal. Isn't that the kind of person who would stand beside you in life, not behind you?" Her son listened quietly. He didn't answer directly, but his silence wasn't disinterest. It was thoughtfulness. The mother knew her son well. She could see it in the way his eyes lingered when the young woman's name came up, in the way he smiled faintly when recalling her blunt words. He wouldn't admit it yet, but he was already curious. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, she finally said it aloud. "I know what I want," she told him. He raised his brow. "And what's that?" "A daughter-in-law who isn't afraid of you." He blinked, caught off guard, then laughed softly. "You're serious?" "Very," she said firmly. "All your life, people have tried to please you. But who has ever challenged you, made you question yourself, and still cared enough to speak the truth? That woman is rare, and I will not ignore it." He leaned back, thoughtful. For the first time, he didn't dismiss his mother's words, and so, quietly, without either of them fully realizing it, the seed had been planted. The mother's heart was set. She had seen what she wanted, and once her heart settled on something, she rarely let go. The young woman, however, remained blissfully unaware. To her, it was just a series of strange coincidences, a chain of encounters with a man she couldn't seem to avoid. She had no idea that someone was already imagining her as part of the family. But life was about to make sure she found out. The young woman thought she was done with the strange encounters. She had scolded him once, embarrassed herself twice, and endured his calm presence more than she cared to admit. She was certain life would carry her away from him soon enough. But fate, as always, had its own plans. One late afternoon, she was leaving her office building, balancing a heavy bag of files, when a sleek car slowed to a stop beside her. She didn't pay attention at first, assuming it belonged to one of the executives. But then the window rolled down, and she saw him sitting there with that faint, unreadable smile. "Need a ride?" he asked casually. She blinked. "What are you doing here?" "Driving," he said simply, as though that explained everything. She rolled her eyes. "I'm fine, thank you." She adjusted her bag and kept walking, determined not to get drawn into his orbit again. But he didn't leave. The car followed slowly along the curb. "You look like you're carrying bricks," he teased. "At least let me give you a lift before you collapse." She turned sharply, exasperated. "Why are you so interested? Don't you have people lining up to flatter you? Why bother with someone who doesn't?" His smile deepened. "Exactly because you don't. It's refreshing." Her steps faltered. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She had expected arrogance, maybe even mockery. But instead, he sounded genuine. Reluctantly, she allowed herself to accept the ride. Sitting beside him in the quiet car felt strange. She kept her gaze on the window, determined not to let silence feel comfortable. "Relax," he said with a light chuckle. "I don't bite." She shot him a look. "You're annoyingly calm, you know that. Most people would have snapped back at me long ago. That's because most people aren't you," he replied without hesitation. Her cheeks warmed, though she quickly masked it with a scoff. "Flattery won't work." "Good," he said smoothly. "I wasn't trying to flatter you." The rest of the ride passed with small talk, but she noticed something different in him. He wasn't trying to impress her with stories of his wealth or his success. He listened when she spoke, asked questions about her day, even laughed at her sarcastic remarks. It was unsettling, but in a strangely comfortable way. Over the next weeks, their paths crossed more often, sometimes at events, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes she suspected by his quiet planning. Each time, she expected the same cold distance she had assumed came with his status. But instead, he showed patience. He never pushed her to like him, never forced himself into her space. Instead, he chipped away at her walls with humor and small acts of kindness. At one community fundraiser, she spilled a drink on her dress, flustered by the mishap. Before she could even panic, he appeared with a clean napkin and whispered lightly, "You're supposed to drink it, not wear it." She laughed in spite of herself, realizing he had the rare ability to make awkward moments feel lighter. Another time, when she struggled to carry a stack of supplies for a volunteer event, he appeared beside her without a word, taking half the weight from her hands. "Teamwork," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Slowly, she began to see sides of him she hadn't expected. He wasn't just calm, he was thoughtful. He noticed things others overlooked. He didn't boast about his wealth, didn't wave his influence around. In fact, he often tried to downplay it. And while she remained cautious, she couldn't deny the warmth in his presence was starting to chip at her guarded heart. Still, her pride held strong. One evening, she told herself firmly, "Don't be fooled. Just because he's kind doesn't mean he's different." She reminded herself of all the arrogant, careless people she had met before. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, but her resolve was tested when he showed a rare vulnerability. They were walking outside after a long event, the city lights glowing around them, when he spoke softly, almost to himself. "You know, people think my life is perfect. Money, power, recognition. But sometimes it's exhausting. I don't know who sees me for me, and who sees what I can give them." She glanced at him, surprised. The calm, confident man she knew was suddenly different, open, almost fragile. For a moment, she saw not the millionaire everyone admired, but a man carrying quiet loneliness behind his composed smile. Without thinking, she said softly, "Maybe that's why you need someone who doesn't care about all that." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, silence said more than words. She quickly looked away, embarrassed by how much truth she had revealed. But he only smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. From that night, something shifted. She still resisted, still told herself she didn't trust easily. But in her heart, a small crack had opened, letting in light she hadn't expected. And while she wrestled with her feelings, his mother was watching closely, quietly pleased. She saw her son smiling more, laughing more, and she knew the young woman was the reason. The mother's silent wish that this bold, fiery girl might one day become her daughter-in-law was slowly moving closer to reality. But destiny still had trials in store. Rumors spread fast, faster than truth, faster than logic. One moment, life felt steady, and the next, whispers floated around like smoke, suffocating her peace. It began after one evening, when she was seen leaving a community event beside him. They had walked out together, nothing more. But in a city where eyes were always watching and tongues rarely rested, it was enough to start a story. "Have you heard?" Someone whispered at her workplace the next morning. "She's with him now." Of course she is. Who wouldn't want to catch a millionaire? By the end of the week, the whispers turned into sly remarks. Gold digger, opportunist. She must have planned it all along. She pretended not to care. She rolled her eyes, buried herself in her work, and kept walking. But at night, when the world was quiet, the words gnawed at her heart. She had always been proud of standing on her own, of never asking for favors. And now people painted her as if she had traded dignity for wealth. When she finally confronted him, her voice trembled with frustration. "Do you know what people are saying about me? That I'm chasing your money, that I'm using you." He looked at her, his calm expression steady as ever. "And do you believe them?" Her jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that everyone else seems to." For the first time, she considered cutting ties. She didn't want to be defined by someone else's shadow, no matter who he was. Her pride screamed at her to walk away before the whispers buried her completely. But then came the moment she never expected. At another event grand, filled with lights and cameras, she stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling the weight of the stares. She could almost hear the whispers curling around her. She wished she could disappear. And then, his mother stepped forward. The older woman had been quiet until then, always gentle, always observant. But that evening, as a small group of people made a careless remark within earshot, she turned to face them directly. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the authority of both wisdom and respect. "You judge too quickly," she said. "Do you know why I respect her? Because she is the only one who spoke to my son like a human being. Not a title, not a bank account, just a man. That is not opportunism. That is honesty. And honesty is rare." The words fell like a stone into still water. silencing the ripples of gossip around them. People shifted awkwardly, avoiding her gaze. The young woman, standing nearby, felt her chest tighten. She hadn't expected defense, not from anyone, least of all from his mother. For a moment, she was too stunned to move. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned, the older woman found her. Placing a hand gently on her shoulder, she said, "Let people talk. They will, no matter what you do. But I know your worth, and I see your heart." Her throat tightened. She wanted to reply, to thank her, but words refused to come. All she could do was nod, fighting the sting in her eyes. That moment stayed with her. She had faced insults before, but never had anyone stepped into the storm on her behalf. It was more than just kindness, it was acceptance. Meanwhile, he watched quietly from a distance. He saw the way his mother stood by her, the way her defenses softened when she felt understood. And for the first time, he realized something deeper. His mother didn't just like her, she had already chosen her. The next day, when he met her, he didn't try to minimize the rumors or brush them aside. Instead, he said gently, "You don't have to fight this alone. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. But if you stay, I'll make sure you never have to defend yourself again." Her eyes searched his, looking for arrogance, for hidden pride, for anything that would prove him wrong. But all she found was sincerity. She exhaled slowly, torn between pride and something she could no longer deny. "I don't want your protection," she said softly. "I want respect. That's all I've ever wanted, and you'll have it," he replied. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that eased the knot in her chest. That night, as she lay in bed, replaying everything, she realized something had shifted. The rumors hadn't destroyed her, they had revealed who truly stood beside her. His calmness, his patience, his mother's fierce defense, all of it told her that she wasn't alone anymore. For a woman who had always relied only on herself, it was both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because her heart was no longer untouchable. Comforting because for the first time, she felt truly seen. And so, what began as insult and misunderstanding was now carving itself into something she couldn't ignore. But the story wasn't over, because sometimes when pride softens and hearts open, destiny takes its boldest steps forward. The weeks that followed felt different. The air between them, once charged with tension, now carried something gentler, something she couldn't quite name but felt every time their eyes met. The whispers had not fully faded, but they no longer cut her as deeply. Whenever she caught a stray comment, she remembered his mother's voice that evening, calm, certain, unshaken. That memory gave her strength. He, too, was changing. She noticed it in small ways. He no longer carried himself with the invisible wall that wealth often built. Instead of being surrounded by people eager to please, he chose quiet moments, standing with her at the edge of an event, laughing at her unfiltered remarks, or walking with her through ordinary streets where no one recognized him. It was as though he was peeling away layers, revealing the man behind the title. One evening, they sat on a park bench, watching children chase each other across the grass. The air smelled faintly of roasted corn from a nearby vendor, and the sound of distant music floated in. For once, there were no flashing cameras, no crowd, just the two of them. "You know," she said softly, "when I first met you, I thought you were the most arrogant man I'd ever seen." He chuckled, leaning back. "And now?" She hesitated, her pride resisting the truth, but her heart nudged her forward. "Now, I think I was wrong. Or maybe I just didn't see the whole picture." He turned his head to look at her, a smile playing at his lips. "That's progress." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. It wasn't a confession, not yet. But it was something. And for him, it was enough. Meanwhile, his mother watched from a distance, not that evening, but in life. She watched how her son seemed lighter, more at ease. She noticed how the young woman carried herself with dignity, even when surrounded by doubt. And in her heart, the decision had already been made. One quiet afternoon, the mother invited her over for tea. The young woman hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready for such intimacy. But she went, curiosity outweighing her fear. The home was warm, filled with soft light and the scent of fresh flowers. The older woman poured tea with gentle hands, her eyes kind. For a while, they spoke about simple things: books, family, the weather. Then the conversation shifted. You know, the mother began. I've met many people who wanted to be part of this family. They came with smiles, with charm, with perfect manners. But you came with honesty. You didn't bend your voice to please. You didn't change your words to fit in. And that is why I admire you. The young woman felt her throat tighten. I never wanted to cause trouble, she said quietly. I just spoke what I felt. And that, the mother replied, is exactly why you belong. The words hung in the air, tender and heavy all at once. She didn't know how to answer, but her heart swelled with something she hadn't felt in a long time: acceptance. Later that evening, as she walked home, she realized the truth she had been avoiding. It wasn't just respect anymore. It wasn't just admiration. Somewhere between the arguments, the laughter, and the silences, her heart had shifted. She had fallen for him. The realization scared her, but it also freed her. For once, she wasn't afraid to feel. Their bond grew quietly, without grand declarations. There were no dramatic gestures, no staged moments. Instead, there were simple conversations, shared laughter, and the comfort of knowing someone saw beyond the surface. One night, as they walked side by side, he finally broke the silence. You know, if I could go back to that day in the cafe, I wouldn't change a thing. She raised an eyebrow. Even me insulting you in front of strangers? Especially that, he said with a smile. Because if you hadn't, we wouldn't be here. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Life is strange, isn't it? Strange, he agreed. But sometimes strange brings us exactly where we're meant to be. For the first time, she didn't argue. She let the truth settle quietly between them. Warm and steady. And in the days that followed, the whispers faded, replaced by new stories of a woman who had dared to speak her truth, and a man who had listened. Stories of a bond that began in conflict but grew into respect, and from respect into something deeper. His mother, watching from the sidelines, felt peace in her heart. She had wished for a daughter-in-law with strength, honesty, and spirit, and now she saw that wish unfolding before her eyes. What began as an insult had turned into something unexpected. What began as pride had softened into love. And so, in the quiet rhythm of everyday life, two people who should never have crossed paths found themselves walking the same road together.